The exercise paradox. Zone 2 cardio research. The single most important training intensity for longevity is not the one that leaves you gasping. It is, paradoxically, the one that feels almost too easy. Zone 2 cardio challenges everything you believe about productive exercise. It suggests that easier, not harder, builds the foundation for longevity. Here is what makes this counterintuitive. Professional athletes, the fittest humans on Earth, spend 80% of their training time at this gentle pace. 80%, not because it is comfortable, but because it drives metabolic adaptations that high-intensity work cannot touch. Elite marathoners, Tour de France cyclists, Olympic distance runners, they all follow the same pattern. Most of their hours are spent at a pace where they can hold a conversation. This is Zone 2, the upper boundary of your aerobic base, the intensity where your body burns fat for fuel, where lactate levels hover at 2 millimoles per liter, where mitochondria multiply. At its core, Zone 2 represents the metabolic sweet spot. Your body primarily oxidizes fat, not glucose. Your lactate production equals lactate clearance. You can sustain this effort for hours, not minutes, and most importantly, you can maintain a conversation while doing it. If you are gasping for air, you have gone too hard, you have left Zone 2, and you are missing the adaptations that matter most for longevity. At its core, Zone 2 training targets your mitochondria, the cellular power plants responsible for energy production. When you exercise at this moderate intensity for extended periods, typically 30 to 60 minutes or longer, you trigger mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria, and improve their efficiency. This adaptation enhances what researchers call metabolic flexibility, your body's ability to switch seamlessly between burning carbohydrates and fats depending on availability and demand. The physiological sweet spot occurs when you are working at approximately 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate, where lactate production equals lactate clearance. Your muscles produce this byproduct of glucose metabolism at a rate your body can process without accumulation, signaling you are below the threshold where carbohydrate dependence dominates. Dr. Peter Attia, a physician focused on longevity science, emphasizes that professional endurance athletes spend approximately 80% of their training time in Zone 2. Despite having access to sophisticated coaching and performance data, research published in the European Journal of Applied Physiology confirms that mitochondrial adaptations occur optimally at these lower intensities, not during high-intensity interval training. A study from the University of Colorado Boulder demonstrated that sedentary individuals who adopted Zone 2 training showed a 35% increase in mitochondrial density after 8 weeks. Study author Dr. Iligo San Millan, who works with professional cyclists, notes that metabolic inflexibility, the inability to efficiently burn fat, is a hallmark of metabolic disease and aging. Zone 2 training directly reverses this dysfunction. The practical test for Zone 2 is remarkably simple. Your heart rate should be roughly 180 minus your age. For a 40-year-old, that means approximately 140 beats per minute. You should be able to speak in full sentences, but not comfortably hold a complex conversation. If you are gasping for air, you have crossed into Zone 3 or higher. Think of Zone 2 as compound interest for your metabolism. The gains accumulate slowly and invisibly, building a foundation of mitochondrial capacity and fat-burning efficiency that pays dividends for decades. In contrast, high-intensity training is like day trading. It produces noticeable short-term results and feels productive, but without the aerobic base beneath it, you are building on unstable ground. High-intensity training without an aerobic foundation just creates fatigue and injury. Zone 2 cardio is a practical way to build the metabolic infrastructure that supports both performance and longevity, prioritizing sustainable adaptations over the temporary satisfaction of exhaustion. VO2 Max predicts your lifespan. The most powerful predictor of how long you will live is not found in your blood work, your family history, or your body weight. It is, surprisingly, a fitness metric that most people never measure and many physicians never discuss. VO2 Max, your maximum oxygen utilization capacity during peak exertion, demonstrates a stronger association with all-cause mortality than virtually any pharmaceutical intervention currently available. The data reveals a striking reality. The difference between the lowest and highest quartiles of VO2 Max corresponds to a 4 to 5 times difference in mortality risk, a magnitude that exceeds the protective effect of statin therapy. blood pressure medication, or smoking cessation. At its core, VO2 Max represents the efficiency of your entire oxygen delivery system, integrating lung function, cardiac output, vascular capacity, and mitochondrial density into a single number that correlates remarkably well with both health span and lifespan. At its core, VO2 Max represents the efficiency of your entire oxygen delivery system. When you exercise at maximum intensity, your body faces a cascading demand. Your lungs must extract oxygen from air, your heart must pump oxygenated blood through your vascular network, and your muscle mitochondria must utilize that oxygen to produce adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, the cellular energy currency. The measurement is expressed as milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. VO2 max declines predictably with age, approximately 10% per decade after age 30 in sedentary individuals. But this decline is not inevitable. Training, particularly high-intensity interval work in Zone 5, can maintain or even increase VO2 max well into older age. The metric integrates cardiovascular capacity, mitochondrial density, and muscular efficiency into a single number that correlates remarkably well with health span. A landmark study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association analyzed more than 120,000 patients who underwent exercise treadmill testing. The findings were stark. Individuals in the lowest quartile of VO2 max had a 4 to 5 times higher risk of death compared to those in the highest quartile. Dr. Peter Attia has noted that this magnitude of risk reduction exceeds what most pharmaceutical interventions can achieve, including statin therapy for cholesterol management. Research from the Cooper Institute in Dallas, tracking participants over multiple decades, demonstrated that even modest improvements in VO2 max, equivalent to an increase of 1 MET, or metabolic equivalent of task, corresponded to a 10 to 25% reduction in mortality risk. The Cleveland Clinic published findings in 2023 confirming that VO2 max outperformed traditional risk factors, including hypertension, diabetes, and smoking history, in predicting cardiovascular death. The most effective protocol for improving VO2 max involves Zone 5 interval training, brief periods of near maximal effort, typically 3 to 8 minutes, followed by active recovery. A common approach is 4 intervals of 4 minutes at 90 to 95% of maximum heart rate, with 3 minutes of easy recovery between efforts, performed once or twice weekly. However, the critical caveat is that high-intensity training requires an aerobic foundation. Without adequate Zone 2 base building, Zone 5 intervals become unsustainable and increase injury risk. Think of VO2 max as the ceiling of your fitness capacity, while Zone 2 represents the foundation. You cannot raise the ceiling without first widening and strengthening the base beneath it. VO2 max testing and training is a practical way to quantify and improve your longevity potential, translating abstract cardiovascular health into a measurable, modifiable number with profound implications for lifespan. Rocking is the oldest exercise. The fitness industry continuously markets novel training modalities and sophisticated equipment. Yet the most effective form of functional conditioning may be the one humans have practiced for hundreds of thousands of years. Rocking, the act of walking with a weighted backpack, represents humanity's most ancestral movement pattern. Predating gymnasiums, running shoes, and structured exercise programs, this practice combines cardiovascular conditioning with load-bearing strength development through the simple addition of external weight to natural human locomotion. What social media presents as a rediscovered fitness trend is actually the restoration of a fundamental survival skill, one that shaped human physiology and remains remarkably effective for modern health optimization. At its core, rocking adds an external load to the fundamental human movement pattern of walking, transforming a low-intensity activity into moderate-intensity training that simultaneously challenges your cardiovascular system and load-bearing musculature. When you carry weight on your back, your body must stabilize the load through core engagement, increase cardiac output to supply oxygen to working muscles, and recruit postural muscles that remain dormant during unloaded walking. The added resistance increases caloric expenditure by approximately 30 to 40% compared to walking the same distance without weight. A 1-hour walk carrying 20 to 30 pounds burns approximately 400 to 500 calories for a 170-pound individual. Research in biomechanics shows that rucking activates the posterior chain, including glutes, hamstrings, and spinal erectors, while maintaining a lower impact profile than running. The claim that rucking is the oldest exercise is historically accurate. Anthropological evidence confirms that early humans regularly carried loads, including hunted game, gathered food, and children, over long distances. Military research provides the most extensive data on rucking physiology. A study published in Military Medicine examined soldiers performing loaded marches and found significant improvements in both aerobic capacity and lower body strength after 8 weeks of progressive training. Dr. Michael Easter, author of The Comfort Crisis, documented how hunter-gatherer populations like the Hadza of Tanzania routinely carry 40 to 60 pounds during daily activities. The American Council on Exercise has validated rucking as an effective form of cardiovascular training that also builds bone density, a critical factor in aging populations at risk for osteoporosis. Begin with 10% of your body weight in a backpack and walk for 20 to 30 minutes on flat terrain, gradually increasing either weight or distance. Ensure the backpack sits high on your back with weight distributed evenly. If you weigh 160 pounds, start with 15 to 20 pounds. Rucking serves as a bridge between pure cardio and strength training, accessible to individuals who find running too high impact or weightlifting intimidating. Rucking is a practical way to combine ancestral movement patterns with modern fitness goals, building cardiovascular endurance and functional strength through a single, accessible activity. Walking speed predicts longevity. Most people never consider the speed at which they walk as a health metric. Yet this simple measurement predicts mortality risk with remarkable precision. Gait speed, the velocity at which you naturally walk, has emerged from geriatric research as what scientists call the sixth vital sign, joining blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, temperature, and oxygen saturation as a fundamental health indicator. The finding is both straightforward and profound. How fast you walk reflects the integrated function of nearly every major physiological system, and a decline in walking speed signals systemic deterioration often years before clinical symptoms appear. Research demonstrates that individuals walking slower than 0.8 meters per second, roughly 1.8 miles per hour, face significantly elevated mortality risk. At its core, walking speed integrates multiple physiological systems into a single observable output. Maintaining a brisk pace requires adequate cardiovascular fitness to deliver oxygen, sufficient muscular strength to propel body weight forward, functional joint mobility to achieve proper stride mechanics, neurological coordination to maintain balance, and cognitive processing to navigate terrain. When any of these systems degrades, gait speed declines. Researchers measure what is called usual gait speed, the pace someone naturally adopts, and maximum gait speed, the fastest sustainable pace. The difference between these two measurements reveals physiological reserve capacity. The biomechanics involve coordinated muscle activation patterns, hip extension power, ankle plantar flexion, and core stability, all occurring in a precisely timed sequence that repeats with each step. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of the American Medical Association examined 9 cohort studies including nearly 5,000 older adults. The findings demonstrated that gait speed predicted survival with remarkable accuracy. Each increase of 0.1 meters per second in walking speed corresponded to a 12% reduction in mortality risk. Research from the University of Pittsburgh, tracking older adults over 15 years, found that individuals who walked faster than 1 meter per second, approximately 2.2 miles per hour, had significantly better survival rates than slower walkers. Dr. Stephanie Studansky, the lead researcher, noted that gait speed reflects the integrated function of multiple organ systems and serves as a window into overall physiological vitality. The National Institute on Aging has incorporated gait speed assessment into standard geriatric evaluation protocols. Test your gait speed by timing how long it takes to walk 4 meters, or 13 feet, at your normal pace. Divide 4 by the number of seconds to get meters per second. A healthy target is above 1 meter per second. If you complete the distance in less than 4 seconds, you are in the optimal range. Think of walking speed as your body's dashboard indicator, a simple readout reflecting the complex machinery beneath. Monitoring walking speed is a practical way to assess functional health and identify early decline, providing an actionable metric that responds to strength training, cardiovascular conditioning, and mobility work. Grip strength reveals overall health. A simple 3-second squeeze of your hand reveals more about your overall health and longevity than many expensive blood tests. Grip strength, the maximum force your hand can generate when squeezing, has emerged from large-scale epidemiological research as an unexpectedly powerful biomarker for whole body muscle mass, functional capacity, and mortality risk. What appears to be a localized measurement of hand and forearm strength actually serves as a window into systemic physiological status, predicting cardiovascular events, cognitive decline, and all cause mortality with accuracy that rivals or exceeds traditional clinical markers. The paradox is striking. A measurement requiring no laboratory analysis and minimal equipment outperforms sophisticated diagnostic tools in predicting health trajectories. At its core, grip strength measurement captures the functional output of your muscular system, which correlates strongly with overall muscle mass and neuromuscular efficiency. When you squeeze a dynamometer, you recruit muscles in your fingers, hand, forearm, and even shoulder girdle through stabilization. But the deeper significance lies in what grip strength represents. Muscle tissue serves as a metabolic reservoir, storing amino acids, regulating glucose uptake, and producing myokines, signaling proteins that influence inflammation and metabolism throughout the body. Sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass and function, begins in the third decade and accelerates after age 60. Grip strength declines in parallel, making it a convenient proxy for tracking whole body muscle status without expensive imaging like DEXA scans or MRI. The prospective urban-rural epidemiology study, known as the PURE study, published in The Lancet, followed nearly 140,000 adults across 17 countries. The results were unambiguous. Grip strength predicted all-cause mortality, cardiovascular death, and heart attack risk more accurately than systolic blood pressure. For every 5-kilogram decline in grip strength, there was a 16% increase in all-cause mortality risk. Research from the University of Michigan found that grip strength correlated with faster walking speed, better cognitive function, and improved quality of life in older adults. Dr. Richard Bohannon, a physical therapy researcher who has published extensively on grip strength norms, emphasizes that the measurement provides a rapid, inexpensive assessment of functional status that requires minimal equipment. Grip strength can be measured with a hand dynamometer available for $30 to $50. Squeeze maximally for 5 seconds with each hand, performing 3 trials and recording the best result. For men, a grip strength below 27 kilograms, roughly 60 pounds, indicates weakness. For women, below 16 kilograms, roughly 35 pounds, signals concern. These thresholds vary by age and body size. Think of grip strength as a diagnostic window, revealing the state of your entire muscular system through a single, 3-second test. Testing grip strength is a practical way to monitor muscle health and functional capacity, providing an accessible metric that responds predictably to resistance training and adequate protein intake. The longevity molecules. Your cells run on a fuel that declines, NAD+. Every cell in your body depends on a molecule that most people have never heard of, yet its decline may be one of the most fundamental drivers of aging. NAD+, or nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, is a coenzyme present in every living cell, essential for energy production, DNA repair, and the regulation of circadian rhythms. The paradox of aging research is that this critical molecule, abundant in youth, declines by approximately 50% between age 20 and age 60, compromising cellular function across nearly every organ system. What makes NAD+ particularly significant is not merely its necessity, but the mounting evidence that restoring its levels may reverse measurable markers of biological aging. At its core, NAD+ functions as an electron carrier in cellular metabolism, shuttling high-energy electrons through the mitochondrial respiratory chain to produce ATP, the energy currency that powers cellular processes. Beyond energy production, NAD+ serves as a substrate for sirtuins, a family of proteins that regulate gene expression, inflammation, and stress resistance, and for PARP enzymes, which repair damaged DNA. The age-related decline in NAD+ creates a cascading deficit. Mitochondria become less efficient, DNA damage accumulates, and sirtuin activity diminishes, collectively contributing to cellular senescence. The body produces NAD+ through multiple pathways, including the salvage pathway that recycles used Na+, and the de novo pathway that synthesizes it from tryptophan. But both pathways become less efficient with age. Research published in Cell Metabolism by Dr. Shinichiro Amai at Washington University demonstrated that NAD+ levels decline in multiple tissues with age, including muscle, liver, and brain. A landmark study in Science showed that supplementing mice with nicotinamide riboside, or NR, an NAD+ precursor, improved mitochondrial function and extended health span. David Sinclair at Harvard Medical School has published extensively on NAD+ metabolism, noting that boosting NAD+ levels in animal models improves DNA repair, enhances mitochondrial function, and extends lifespan by 10 to 20%. Human trials remain limited but promising. A study published in Nature Communications in 2020 found that NR supplementation increased NAD+ levels in skeletal muscle by approximately 60% in healthy middle-aged adults. Research from the University of Colorado Boulder demonstrated that nicotinamide mononucleotide, or MN, another precursor, improved vascular function in older adults after 12 weeks of supplementation. The primary NAD+ precursors available as supplements are nicotinamide riboside, nicotinamide mononucleotide, and niacin, also called nicotinic acid. Typical dosing for NR ranges from 250 to 500 mg daily, while MMN is often taken at 250 to 1000 mg. Niacin is effective but causes flushing in many users, a temporary reddening and warming of the skin. Think of Na+ as cellular currency. When reserves are high, cells can afford to invest in maintenance, repair, and optimal function. When reserves decline, cells operate in austerity mode, prioritizing survival over thriving. Exercise, particularly zoned cardio, caloric restriction, and heat exposure through sauna use also stimulate endogenous NAD+ production. NAD+ supplementation and lifestyle interventions that boost its production are practical ways to address a fundamental mechanism of cellular aging, supporting energy metabolism, DNA repair, and mitochondrial health across multiple organ systems. Clearing out zombie cells. Senolytics. Your body accumulates cells that refuse to die but also refuse to function, lingering in tissues like biological debris that actively damages surrounding healthy cells. These senescent cells, often called zombie cells, represent one of the 9 hallmarks of aging identified by longevity researchers. The problem is not simply their presence, it is their behavior. Senescent cells secrete inflammatory molecules, enzymes that degrade tissue structure, and signals that induce neighboring cells to also become senescent, creating what scientists call the senescence-associated secretory phenotype, or SASP. The emerging class of drugs called Senolytics specifically targets and eliminates these dysfunctional cells, offering a potential intervention to reverse aspects of tissue aging. At its core, cellular senescence is a state of permanent growth arrest, triggered by DNA damage, telomere shortening, oncogene activation, or oxidative stress. In young organisms, senescent cells serve a protective function. They prevent damaged cells from becoming cancerous and participate in wound healing and tissue remodeling. The immune system, particularly natural killer cells and macrophages, efficiently clears these cells. But with aging, 2 problems emerge. The rate of senescent cell accumulation accelerates, and immune clearance becomes less efficient. The result is a gradual buildup of senescent cells in adipose tissue, muscle, blood vessels, and organs. Despite representing only a small percentage of total cells, typically 1 to 5% in aged tissues, their inflammatory secretions, including interleukin-6, interleukin-8, and matrix metalloproteinases, create a pro-aging microenvironment that affects entire tissue regions. The foundational research on Senolytics comes from the Mayo Clinic, where Dr. James Kirkland and Dr. Jan van Dersen published a landmark study in Nature in 2011, demonstrating that genetically clearing senescent cells in mice delayed age, related pathology, and extended health span. Subsequent work published in Aging Cell in 2015 identified the first senolytic compounds, dasatinib, a cancer drug, combined with quercetin, a plant flavonoid. The combination selectively induced apoptosis in senescent cells while sparing normal cells. In mice, this intervention improved physical function, reduced frailty, and extended lifespan. Human trials have begun. A pilot study published in EBO Medicine in 2019 treated 14 patients with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis using dasatinib plus quercetin for 3 weeks. Results showed improvements in physical function and reduced senescent cell markers. Research from the University of Minnesota demonstrated that intermittent senolytic treatment, administered only a few days per month, was sufficient to maintain benefits. The most studied senolytic combination is dasatinib at 100 mg plus quercetin at 1000 mg, administered for 2 consecutive days. The protocol is typically repeated monthly or quarterly rather than daily. Quercetin alone shows modest senolytic activity and is available as a supplement, though its efficacy without dasatinib is uncertain. Fisetin, another flavonoid found in strawberries, has demonstrated senolytic properties in preclinical studies, with human trials underway using doses of 1000 to 1500 mg. Think of senescent cells as broken machinery left on a factory floor. Not only do they occupy space and consume resources, they actively leak toxins that damage functioning equipment nearby. Senolytics represent a targeted cleanup crew, removing the debris without disrupting ongoing operations. The intermittent dosing strategy reflects the fact that once cleared, senescent cells do not immediately reaccumulate. Senolytic interventions are a practical way to address cellular aging at its source, selectively removing dysfunctional cells that drive inflammation, tissue dysfunction, and age-related pathology across multiple organ systems. The most powerful longevity drug, rapamycin, the most consistently effective longevity intervention ever tested in laboratory animals, is a drug that most people have never encountered outside of organ transplantation. Rapamycin, also known as sirolimus, has extended lifespan in every organism tested, including yeast, worms, flies, and mice, with increases ranging from 9 to 25% depending on dosing and timing. What makes this molecule particularly remarkable is not just the magnitude of effect, but the consistency across species and the fact that benefits occur even when treatment begins in middle age. No other pharmaceutical intervention has demonstrated this reproducible extension of maximum lifespan across diverse organisms. At its core, rapamycin inhibits a protein complex called mechanistic target of rapamycin, or mTOR, which functions as a central regulator of cellular growth, metabolism, and protein synthesis. mTOR acts as a nutrient sensor. When resources are abundant, TOR activity increases, promoting cell growth and division. When resources are scarce, mTOR activity decreases, triggering autophagy, the cellular recycling process that breaks down damaged proteins and organelles. Rapamycin mimics the state of nutrient scarcity, even in the presence of adequate food, shifting metabolism toward maintenance and repair rather than growth. This recalibration affects multiple longevity pathways, enhancing autophagy, reducing inflammation, improving mitochondrial function, and potentially slowing the accumulation of senescent cells. The National Institute on Aging's Interventions testing program has consistently identified rapamycin as the most robust lifespan extending compound. Studies published in Nature and Aging Cell demonstrate that rapamycin extends median and maximum lifespan in mice by 9 to 14%. Even when treatment begins at 20 months, equivalent to human middle age. Dr. Matt Kaberlein at the University of Washington has pioneered research on rapamycin for companion dogs through the Dog Aging Project. Preliminary results suggest improved cardiac function in treated animals. In humans, rapamycin is FDA approved as an immunosuppressant for transplant patients, but a growing number of longevity-focused physicians prescribe it off-label at lower, intermittent doses, typically 3 to 8 mg once weekly. A clinical trial called PL, or Participatory Evaluation of Aging with Rapamycin for Longevity, is currently enrolling participants to assess safety and biomarker effects in healthy aging adults. Rapamycin requires physician supervision and prescription. The intermittent dosing strategy, weekly rather than daily, aims to capture longevity benefits while minimizing immunosuppressive effects. Common side effects at higher doses include mouth sores, elevated blood glucose, and increased infection risk. Think of mTOR as a growth accelerator. Constantly pressing the pedal drives rapid progress but also rapid wear. Rapamycin provides periodic break application, allowing time for maintenance and repair. Rapamycin is a practical way to modulate fundamental growth and aging pathways, though its use requires careful medical oversight to balance longevity potential against known side effects. Metformin, the diabetes drug for longevity. Metformin is the most widely prescribed medication for type 2 diabetes, taken by over 150 million people globally. yet its potential extends far beyond glucose control. Observational studies reveal a paradox. Diabetic patients taking metformin often demonstrate lower mortality rates than non-diabetic individuals not taking the drug, suggesting protective effects that transcend diabetes management. This finding has positioned metformin as the subject of TAME, Targeting Aging with Metformin, the first clinical trial designed to test whether an FDA-approved drug can slow biological aging in non-diabetic individuals. If successful, the trial could establish aging itself as a treatable condition. At its core, metformin activates an enzyme called AMP, activated protein kinase, or AMPK, often described as the cell's energy sensor. When cellular energy levels decline, indicated by a rising ratio of AMP to ATP, AMPK activates. AMPK activation triggers a coordinated metabolic response. It inhibits energy-consuming processes like fat and protein synthesis, activates energy-producing pathways like fat oxidation, stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis, and promotes autophagy. These effects collectively mimic aspects of caloric restriction, one of the most reliable interventions for extending lifespan in laboratory animals. Metformin also reduces hepatic glucose production, improves insulin sensitivity, and appears to reduce inflammation and oxidative stress. The mechanism by which metformin activates AMPK involves mild inhibition of complex 1 in the mitochondrial electron transport chain, creating a subtle energy deficit that triggers the beneficial stress response. A landmark observational study published in Diabetes, Obesity and Metabolism in 2014 compared 180,000 metformin-treated diabetics with matched non-diabetic controls. The metformin group showed 15% lower all-cause mortality. Even after adjusting for confounding variables, research published in Cell demonstrated that metformin extended healthspan and lifespan in C. elegans worms, while studies in mice showed increased lifespan and delayed onset of age-related diseases. Dr. Nabazili at Albert Einstein College of Medicine is leading the TAME trial, which aims to enroll 3,000 non-diabetic adults aged 65 to 79 to test whether metformin delays age-related diseases including cardiovascular disease, cancer, and dementia. The typical dose in the trial is 1,500 milligrams daily, divided into 2 doses. Metformin is available by prescription and is inexpensive, typically costing less than $10 monthly for generic versions. Common side effects include gastrointestinal discomfort, particularly when starting, which can be minimized by gradual dose escalation and taking extended-release formulations. Metformin may reduce vitamin B12 absorption, requiring monitoring or supplementation. Think of AMPK as a metabolic switch, flipping your cells from storage mode to efficiency mode, prioritizing maintenance over expansion. Metformin is a practical way to activate cellular energy, sensing pathways that mimic caloric restriction, offering a well-tolerated, affordable intervention with emerging evidence for healthspan extension beyond diabetes management. Spermidine, autophagy from food. Spermidine is a naturally occurring polyamine compound, present in all living cells and abundant in specific foods, that declines progressively with age in human tissues. What distinguishes spermidine from synthetic pharmaceutical interventions is its dual identity. It is both an endogenous molecule produced by your cells and gut microbiome, and a dietary component you can obtain from wheat germ, aged cheese, mushrooms, and legumes. Population studies reveal a striking correlation. Individuals with higher dietary spermidine intake demonstrate reduced cardiovascular mortality and longer lifespans. This molecule has captured attention in longevity research because it induces autophagy, the cellular self-cleaning process, through a mechanism distinct from caloric restriction or rapamycin. At its core, spermidine functions as an autophagy inducer by inhibiting enzymes called acetyltransferases, which add acetyl groups to proteins. This inhibition leads to decetylation of autophagy-related proteins, activating the cellular machinery responsible for breaking down and recycling damaged components. Autophagy literally means self-eating, a process where cells engulf dysfunctional proteins, damaged mitochondria, and other cellular debris in double membrane structures called autophagosomes, which then fuse with lysosomes for degradation. The breakdown products, amino acids, fatty acids, and nucleotides, are recycled to build new cellular components. Spermidine levels decline with age, from approximately 5 to 15 nanomoles per gram of tissue in youth to significantly lower levels in older adults. This decline correlates with reduced autophagic capacity. one of the hallmarks of aging. Research published in Nature Medicine in 2018 analyzed dietary spermidine intake in 829 participants over 20 years. Higher spermidine consumption, averaging 6 milligrams per day, was associated with a 40% reduction in cardiovascular mortality and a reduction in overall mortality. Animal studies published in Cell Reports demonstrated that spermidine supplementation extended lifespan in yeast, flies, worms, and mice by 12 to 25%. A human trial published in Cell in 2020 examined cognitive effects of spermidine supplementation in older adults with subjective cognitive decline. After 12 months, participants receiving 1.2 milligrams daily showed no cognitive decline compared to modest decline in placebo groups. Dr. Frank Madio at the University of Graz in Austria has extensively studied spermidine's cardioprotective effects, demonstrating improved diastolic function and reduced cardiac hypertrophy in aged mice. Spermidine-rich foods include wheat germ, approximately 24 milligrams per 100 grams, aged cheddar, mushrooms, soybeans, and natto, a Japanese fermented soy product. Supplements typically provide 1 to 6 milligrams per serving, matching the range associated with benefits in population studies. Think of autophagy as cellular housekeeping. Spermidine acts as the supervisor, ensuring the cleaning crew remains active, preventing the accumulation of molecular garbage that impairs function. Spermidine supplementation and dietary optimization are practical ways to maintain autophagic capacity, supporting cellular renewal and waste clearance through a naturally occurring compound with strong safety data and emerging longevity evidence. The metabolic revolution, the hormone that changed everything, GLP-1s. The most significant pharmaceutical development in metabolic medicine is not a new discovery. It is the therapeutic application of a hormone your intestines have been producing your entire life. Glucagon-like peptide 1, or GLP-1, is a naturally occurring incretin hormone released by L cells in the small intestine in response to food intake. For decades, researchers understood its role in stimulating insulin secretion, but the development of GLP-1 receptor agonists, synthetic molecules that mimic and amplify this hormone's effects, has fundamentally transformed the treatment of type 2 diabetes and obesity. What makes these drugs revolutionary is not merely their efficacy, with weight loss averaging 15 to 20% of body weight, but their mechanism. They restore aspects of metabolic regulation that have been disrupted by modern food environments and sedentary lifestyles. At its core, GLP-1 functions as a satiety signal, communicating from the gut to the brain that nutrient intake is sufficient. When you eat, particularly protein and fat, intestinal L cells release GLP-1, which binds to receptors throughout the body. In the pancreas, it stimulates insulin secretion from beta cells and suppresses glucagon release from alpha cells, lowering blood glucose. In the stomach, it slows gastric emptying, prolonging the sensation of fullness. Most significantly, GLP-1 crosses the blood-brain barrier and acts on receptors in the hypothalamus and brainstem, regions that regulate appetite and food reward. This central nervous system effect reduces hunger, decreases food cravings, and alters the hedonic response to highly palatable foods. Native GLP-1 has a half-life of only 2 to 3 minutes, rapidly degraded by the enzyme DPP-4. Pharmaceutical GLP-1 agonists like semaglutide and tirzepatide are engineered to resist this degradation, extending their half-life to approximately 1 week. The clinical evidence for GLP-1 receptor agonists is extensive and rigorously established. The STEP trials, semaglutide treatment effect in people with obesity, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2021, demonstrated that semaglutide at 2.4 milligrams weekly produced an average weight loss of 14.9% over 68 weeks, compared to 2.4% with placebo. The SURAMO-UNT trials for tirzepatide, a dual GIP and GLP-1 agonist, showed even greater effects, with average weight loss reaching 20.9% at the highest dose. Beyond weight reduction, the SELECT trial published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2023 demonstrated that SEMED reduced major adverse cardiovascular events by 20% in patients with obesity and cardiovascular disease, independent of weight loss. Dr. Gifford Jones, writing in medical journals, has noted that these medications represent the first pharmacological interventions that meaningfully address the biological drive to overeat in obesogenic environments. The practical application of GLP-1 agonists requires weekly subcutaneous injections. Though oral formulations of semaglutide are available, dosing begins low and escalates gradually over 12 to 20 weeks to minimize gastrointestinal side effects, primarily nausea, which affects 20 to 40% of users but typically resolves. Common protocols start at 0.25 mg weekly for semaglutide, increasing every 4 weeks to a maintenance dose of 1 to 2.4 mg. The medications are expensive, ranging from $900 to $1,300 monthly without insurance. Though coverage is expanding, think of GLP-1 as a dimmer switch on appetite. Native hormone provides subtle meal-to-meal regulation, but in environments of constant food availability and hyperpalatable options, this signal becomes insufficient. Pharmaceutical doses restore the signal strength, allowing satiety mechanisms to function against modern food cues. GLP-1 receptor agonists are a practical way to address the biological mismatch between human physiology and contemporary food environments, restoring hormonal satiety signals that regulate appetite, glucose metabolism, and cardiovascular risk. Berberine, nature's metformin, a compound extracted from the roots and bark of plants used in traditional Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine for thousands of years, is now being called nature's metformin, drawing comparisons to the world's most prescribed diabetes medication. Berberine is a yellow alkaloid found in plants including golden seal, barberry and Oregon grape, and research over the past 2 decades has revealed its remarkable effects on glucose metabolism, lipid profiles, and insulin sensitivity. What makes berberine particularly intriguing in the supplement landscape is the robustness of its clinical evidence. Unlike many botanical compounds with preliminary or contradictory data, berberine has been tested in numerous randomized controlled trials, demonstrating efficacy that rivals pharmaceutical interventions for specific metabolic parameters. At its core, berberine activates AMP, activated protein kinase, or AMPK, the same cellular energy sensor targeted by metformin. When berberine enters cells, it mildly inhibits mitochondrial function, creating a transient energy deficit that activates AMPK. This activation triggers a cascade of metabolic effects: increased glucose uptake in muscle cells through translocation of GLUT.4 transporters, reduced glucose production in the liver through suppression of gluconeogenic enzymes, enhanced fat oxidation, and improved insulin receptor sensitivity. Berberine also influences gut microbiota composition, promoting beneficial bacterial strains and reducing lipopolysaccharide-producing species, which may contribute to its anti-inflammatory effects. The compound has poor bioavailability, with only about 5% absorbed in the small intestine, but this may be advantageous, allowing high concentrations to reach the colon where microbiome modulation occurs. A meta-analysis published in Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine in 2015 analyzed 14 randomized controlled trials with over 1,000 participants, demonstrating that berberine supplementation reduced fasting blood glucose by an average of 20 mg per deciliter, hemoglobin A1c by 0.7%, and triglycerides by approximately 44 mg per deciliter. A study published in Metabolism directly compared berberine to metformin in 116 diabetic patients over 3 months. Both groups experienced similar reductions in fasting glucose, postprandial glucose, and hemoglobin A1c, with berberine at 500 mg 3 times daily performing equivalently to metformin at 500 mg 3 times daily. Research from Hojong University of Science and Technology published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism showed that berberine improved insulin sensitivity and reduced visceral fat in patients with metabolic syndrome. Dr. Jason Fung, a nephrologist focused on metabolic disease, has noted that berberine's multiple mechanisms, including AMPK activation and microbiome effects, make it a compelling option for individuals with insulin resistance. The standard berberine dosing protocol is 500 mg taken 2 to 3 times daily with meals, for a total daily dose of 1,000 to 1,500 mg. Taking it with food improves tolerability and may enhance absorption. The most common side effects are gastrointestinal, including cramping, diarrhea, and constipation, affecting approximately 10 to 20% of users. These typically resolve within several weeks or with dose reduction. Berberine can interact with medications metabolized by cytochrome P450 enzymes, particularly CYP3A.4, and may enhance the effects of antidiabetic medications. requiring blood glucose monitoring. Think of Berberine as a metabolic reset button. It doesn't provide energy or stimulation, but recalibrates cellular machinery to improve fuel utilization, shifting metabolism toward efficiency rather than storage. Berberine supplementation is a practical way to activate energy, sensing pathways that improve glucose metabolism and insulin sensitivity, offering a well-studied botanical alternative with effects comparable to pharmaceutical interventions for specific metabolic markers. Metabolic flexibility is the goal. The fitness and nutrition industries focus relentlessly on what to eat, macronutrient ratios, meal timing, and supplement protocols. Yet the most important metabolic capacity receives far less attention. Metabolic flexibility is your body's ability to efficiently switch between burning carbohydrates and fats as primary fuel sources, depending on availability, activity level, and metabolic demand. This adaptability, seamless and automatic in metabolically healthy individuals, becomes progressively impaired with sedentary behavior, chronic overfeeding, and poor dietary quality. The loss of metabolic flexibility is not merely a theoretical concern. It is measurable through respiratory exchange ratio, or RER, testing, and represents a fundamental dysfunction underlying insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. At its core, metabolic flexibility depends on mitochondrial capacity and insulin sensitivity. In a flexible metabolic state, your cells can oxidize fatty acids during fasting or low-intensity activity, then rapidly shift to glucose oxidation when carbohydrates become available or intensity increases. This switching mechanism requires functional mitochondria capable of beta oxidation, the process of breaking down fats, and responsive insulin signaling that allows glucose to enter cells. When you are metabolically inflexible, cells become locked into preferential glucose dependence, even when fatty acids are abundant. This occurs because mitochondria become less efficient. Insulin resistance prevents glucose uptake, and the cellular machinery for fat oxidation, including enzymes like CPT.1, becomes downregulated. The result is a paradox: elevated blood glucose and elevated blood lipids simultaneously, because neither fuel source is being efficiently utilized. Research published in Cell Metabolism by Dr. Brett Goodpaster at the Translational Research Institute demonstrated that metabolic inflexibility, measured as impaired suppression of fat oxidation in response to insulin, predicts the development of type 2 diabetes independent of obesity. A study from the University of Colorado published in Diabetes used metabolic chambers to show that insulin-resistant individuals maintained high RER values, indicating carbohydrate dependence, even after overnight fasting when fat oxidation should dominate. Dr. Benjamin Bickman, a metabolic researcher at Brigham Young University, emphasizes that restoring metabolic flexibility requires addressing both sides of the equation, improving mitochondrial capacity through zone 2 training and improving insulin sensitivity through carbohydrate moderation and time-restricted eating. The Framingham Heart Study identified metabolic inflexibility as a predictor of cardiovascular events and all-cause mortality. The most effective interventions for restoring metabolic flexibility combine exercise and nutrition strategies. Zone 2 cardio, performed at conversational pace for 45 to 90 minutes, stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis and enhances fat oxidation capacity. Resistance training improves insulin sensitivity by increasing glucose-hungry muscle mass. On the nutrition side, periods of low carbohydrate availability, whether through carbohydrate restriction, time-restricted eating, or strategic timing around workouts, force the body to upregulate fat oxidation pathways. High-intensity interval training, particularly in a fasted or low glycogen state, creates metabolic stress that improves fuel switching. Think of metabolic flexibility as being bilingual in energy metabolism. Inflexible metabolism is like knowing only one language, functional but limited. Flexibility means fluency in both, switching effortlessly based on context. Developing metabolic flexibility is a practical way to restore fundamental cellular function, improving energy stability, reducing disease risk, and creating resilience against both fasting and feeding states. Time-restricted eating versus caloric restriction. The longevity and weight loss communities have long debated whether when you eat matters as much as how much you eat, creating a division between advocates of caloric restriction, the reduction of total energy intake, and time-restricted eating, the compression of food consumption into a defined window. Both approaches produce weight loss and metabolic improvements, but emerging research suggests they may work through partially distinct mechanisms with different practical trade-offs. The question is not which approach is superior in absolute terms, but which intervention is sustainable for an individual, and whether combining both strategies produces additive benefits or unnecessary complexity. At its core, caloric restriction operates through energy deficit, creating a state where energy expenditure exceeds energy intake, forcing the body to mobilize stored fuel. This deficit triggers adaptive responses, increased fat oxidation, reduced insulin levels, activation of AMPK, and enhanced autophagy. Prolonged caloric restriction, typically defined as a 20 to 40% reduction below maintenance calories, has extended lifespan in organisms from yeast to primates. Though human longevity data remains observational, time-restricted eating, in contrast, focuses on when food is consumed rather than quantity, compressing intake into a 6 to 12-hour window. This creates an extended daily fasting period, typically 12 to 18 hours, during which insulin remains low, glycogen stores deplete, and the body shifts toward fat metabolism. The distinction is crucial. Caloric restriction requires conscious portion control and tracking, while time-restricted eating can occur with ad libitum, or unrestricted, intake during the feeding window. Research published in Cell Metabolism by Dr. Sachin Panda at the Salk Institute demonstrated that mice fed a high-fat diet restricted to an 8-hour window gained significantly less weight and showed better glucose tolerance than mice eating the same calories over 24 hours. A human study published in Cell in 2020 examined time-restricted eating in patients with metabolic syndrome. Participants who restricted eating to a 10-hour window without explicitly reducing calories lost 3.3% body weight and improved insulin sensitivity over 12 weeks. The CALERIE trial, Comprehensive Assessment of Long-Term Effects of Reducing Intake of Energy, published in the Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology, showed that 25% caloric restriction over 2 years produced sustained weight loss, improved cardiometabolic markers, and reduced inflammatory markers, but required intensive counseling and monitoring. Dr. Jason Fung argues that time-restricted eating may be more sustainable because it doesn't require calorie counting, while Dr. Krista Varadi's research suggests the two approaches produce comparable weight loss, approximately 4 to 8% over 8 to 12 weeks. The practical application depends on individual preference and metabolic context. Time-restricted eating typically involves a 16-8 protocol, fasting for 16 hours and eating within an 8-hour window, such as noon to 8 p.m. This approach requires no calorie tracking but demands consistent timing. Caloric restriction requires calculating maintenance calories, typically using the Mifflin-Sager equation, and reducing intake by 20 to 30%, spreading meals across the day, combining both, restricting both timing and quantity, may accelerate results but increases difficulty. Think of caloric restriction as reducing fuel supply, forcing the engine to run on reserves. Time-restricted eating is like creating fuel delivery windows, extending periods when the body must access stored energy. Choosing between time-restricted eating and caloric restriction is a practical way to create metabolic adaptations that support weight loss and longevity, with the optimal approach determined by adherence, lifestyle compatibility, and individual metabolic response. Protein timing and muscle synthesis. The fitness industry has obsessed over protein intake for decades, debating optimal amounts, sources, and quality. But recent research has shifted focus to a variable that may be equally important: timing. The concept of protein timing encompasses both the distribution of protein across meals and the proximity of protein intake to resistance training. Early bodybuilding culture promoted the idea of an anabolic window, a brief post-workout period when protein synthesis was supposedly maximized, driving the practice of immediate post-workout shakes. Modern research has refined this understanding, revealing that while timing matters, the window is wider and the distribution throughout the day may be more consequential than post-exercise urgency alone. At its core, muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, is the process by which cells build new muscle proteins, replacing damaged ones and, under the right conditions, creating net growth. This process is triggered by mechanical tension from resistance training and by the availability of amino acids, particularly leucine, an essential amino acid that activates the mechanistic target of rapamycin complex 1, or mTORC1. which initiates protein synthesis. MPS rates increase within 1 to 2 hours after protein ingestion, peak at approximately 2 to 3 hours, and return to baseline by 3 to 5 hours. This creates a refractory period where muscle becomes temporarily unresponsive to additional amino acid stimulation. Research shows that MPS is maximized by consuming approximately 20 to 40 grams of high-quality protein per meal, with diminishing returns beyond this threshold. The dose-response relationship is non-linear, meaning 10 grams produces some response, 20 to 30 grams produces near maximal response, and 60 grams does not double the effect. A landmark study published in the Journal of Nutrition by Dr. Doug Padden Jones at the University of Texas Medical Branch compared protein distribution patterns. Participants consuming protein evenly across 3 meals, approximately 30 grams each, showed 25% higher 24-hour MPS rates compared to those consuming the same total protein skewed toward dinner, with 10 grams at breakfast, 15 at lunch, and 65 at dinner. Research published in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition examining the anabolic window found that MPS remains elevated for 24 to 48 hours post-resistance training, making total daily protein intake more important than precise post-workout timing, unless training occurs fasted, in which case protein within 2 to 3 hours becomes more relevant. Stuart Phillips at McMaster University has published extensively on protein requirements for older adults, demonstrating that aging muscle requires higher per-meal protein doses, approximately 40 grams, to overcome anabolic resistance. The practical application involves distributing protein across 3 to 4 meals, targeting 25 to 40 grams of high-quality protein per meal, rather than concentrating intake at one meal. Breakfast is a critical opportunity often missed, with many individuals consuming minimal protein in the morning. Sources with high leucine content, such as whey, eggs, chicken, and Greek yogurt, optimize MPS per gram consumed. Post-workout protein is beneficial, particularly if training occurs in a fasted state. But the urgency is lower than previously believed. Consuming protein within 3 to 4 hours is sufficient. Think of MPS as a light switch with a timer. Each protein feeding turns it on for several hours, but once it turns off, you need another feeding to reactivate it. Spacing protein allows multiple daily activations rather than one prolonged signal. Optimizing protein timing and distribution is a practical way to maximize muscle protein synthesis throughout the day, supporting muscle maintenance, recovery, and growth through strategic meal composition rather than total intake alone. Sleep architecture decoded. Sleep is not one thing. Most people treat sleep as a binary state. Either you are asleep or you are awake, and the only metric that matters is duration. This fundamental misunderstanding ignores the reality that sleep is a complex, cyclical process composed of distinct stages, each with unique neurological signatures, physiological functions, and restorative purposes. Modern sleep science has revealed that the architecture of sleep, the pattern and proportion of different stages throughout the night, determines sleep quality as much as total time spent unconscious. You can spend 8 hours in bed and wake unrefreshed if your sleep architecture is disrupted. While 7 hours of structurally sound sleep produces superior restoration, the failure to understand sleep as a multi-stage process explains why many interventions, including certain medications and alcohol, increase sleep duration while paradoxically reducing sleep quality. At its core, sleep architecture consists of 2 fundamentally different states: non-REM sleep, or non-rapid eye movement sleep, and REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep, which cycle in approximately 90-minute intervals throughout the night. Non-REM sleep is further divided into 3 stages. N1 is light sleep, the transition between wakefulness and sleep, lasting only a few minutes. N2 is intermediate sleep, comprising approximately 45 to 55% of total sleep time, characterized by sleep spindles and K complexes, electrical patterns that support memory consolidation. N3 is deep sleep, also called slow wave sleep, dominated by high amplitude delta waves, and constituting 15 to 25% of sleep. This is the most physically restorative stage, where growth hormone secretion peaks, immune function strengthens, and metabolic waste clearance through the glymphatic system reaches maximum efficiency. REM sleep, comprising 20 to 25% of total sleep, is when vivid dreaming occurs, characterized by rapid eye movements, muscle atonia to prevent dream enactment, and brain activity resembling wakefulness. REM supports emotional regulation, procedural memory consolidation, and creative problem solving. Research published in Science by Dr. Decoded at the University of Rochester demonstrated that the glymphatic system, a waste clearance pathway in the brain, increases activity by 60% during deep sleep, removing metabolic byproducts including beta-amyloid, the protein associated with Alzheimer's disease. A study published in Nature Neuroscience showed that deep sleep deprivation, even with preserved total sleep time, impairs glucose metabolism and insulin sensitivity within days. Dr. Matthew Walker, a neuroscientist at UC Berkeley and author of Why We Sleep, emphasizes that sleep stage distribution changes across the night. Deep sleep dominates the first half, particularly the first 90-minute cycle, while REM sleep increases in duration during the second half, especially in the final cycles before waking. This means early sleep disruption disproportionately affects physical restoration, while late sleep loss impacts emotional and cognitive processing. Polysomnography studies demonstrate that alcohol suppresses REM sleep by up to 25%, while benzodiazepines reduce deep sleep, explaining why chemically induced sleep feels less restorative. The practical implications focus on protecting sleep architecture rather than merely extending duration. Consistent sleep and wake times synchronize circadian rhythms, optimizing the timing and quality of each stage. Avoiding alcohol within 3 hours of bedtime preserves REM sleep. Maintaining a cool bedroom temperature, approximately 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, facilitates the core body temperature drop necessary for deep sleep initiation. Sleep tracking devices, while imperfect, can reveal patterns of stage distribution, identifying whether you are obtaining adequate deep sleep, typically 1 to 2 hours, and REM sleep, typically 1.5 to 2 hours, in a 7 to 8 hour sleep period. Think of sleep architecture as a symphony. Each movement has distinct character and purpose, and removing or disrupting any section diminishes the whole performance, regardless of total length. Understanding sleep architecture is a practical way to shift focus from sleep quantity alone to sleep quality, optimizing the proportion and sequencing of stages that determine true physiological and cognitive restoration. Your circadian rhythm is not 24 hours. Chronotypes. The widespread advice to maintain a consistent sleep schedule assumes that everyone's biology operates on the same temporal framework. Yet research reveals a more complex reality. Your circadian rhythm, the internal biological clock that regulates sleep-wake cycles, hormone secretion, body metabolism, operates on a cycle that is close to but not exactly 24 hours, and this intrinsic period length varies between individuals. More significantly, people differ systematically in their chronotype, the genetically influenced preference for sleep and wake timing. These differences are not merely habits or choices. They reflect underlying variation in clock gene expression, creating distinct categories ranging from extreme early types, colloquially called larks, to extreme late types, called owls. The collision between biological chronotype and social schedules, particularly early school and work start times, creates what researchers call social jet lag, a chronic misalignment that impairs health, performance, and longevity. At its core, circadian rhythm is generated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, a cluster of approximately 20,000 neurons in the hypothalamus that functions as the master biological clock. The SCN generates rhythmic activity through transcription translation feedback loops involving clock genes, including PER, CRY, CLOCK, and BMAL1, in the absence of external cues. This intrinsic period, called TOR, averages approximately 24 hours and 11 minutes in humans, but ranges from approximately 23.5 to 24.6 hours. Light exposure, particularly blue wavelengths between 450 and 480 nanometers, detected by intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, entrains this rhythm to the 24-hour day. Chronotype reflects both TOR length and the phase relationship between internal rhythms and external time. Evening chronotypes, approximately 20 to 30% of the population, have delayed phase, meaning their biological night begins later, often not feeling sleepy until midnight or later, and their optimal wake time extends into mid-morning. Morning chronotypes, another 20 to 30%, have advanced phase, naturally waking early and experiencing peak alertness in morning hours. Research published in Nature Communications identified variants in clock genes, particularly PERB3 and CRY1, associated with chronotype differences. A study from the University of Birmingham published in Sleep examined over 430,000 individuals in the UK Biobank, demonstrating that evening chronotypes, forced into early schedules, showed 10% higher mortality risk, increased rates of psychological disorders, diabetes, and neurological conditions. Dr. Till Runeberg at Ludwig Maximilian University coined the term social jet lag, calculated as the difference between sleep timing on work days versus free days. Research published in Current Biology showed that each hour of social jet lag increases obesity risk by 33%. Independent of sleep duration, Dr. Michael Breas, a clinical psychologist specializing in sleep, developed a chronotype classification system based on animal archetypes, expanding beyond the simple early-late binary to capture intermediate variations. The practical approach involves identifying your chronotype through observation of natural sleep timing during periods without obligations, such as vacations, noting when you naturally fall asleep and wake without alarms. The Munich Chronotype Questionnaire, or MCTQ, available online, provides validated assessment. Once identified, align your schedule as closely as possible to your biological preference. If you are an evening chronotype, negotiate later start times, schedule demanding cognitive work in afternoon or evening, and expose yourself to bright light in the late afternoon to delay your rhythm further if needed. Morning chronotypes should front-load important tasks to morning hours and avoid bright light in evening. Light exposure timing is critical. Morning light advances your rhythm, making you sleepier earlier, while evening light delays it. Think of chronotype as your biological time zone. Forcing yourself into a misaligned schedule is equivalent to perpetual international travel without adaptation. Identifying and honoring your chronotype is a practical way to reduce circadian misalignment, optimizing sleep quality, cognitive performance, and long-term health by working with rather than against your genetic predisposition. Sleep pressure is a chemical, adenosine. The feeling of sleepiness that builds throughout the day is not abstract or psychological. It is the direct consequence of a specific molecule accumulating in your brain. Adenosine is a nucleoside that increases in concentration in the brain during waking hours, creating what sleep researchers call sleep pressure or homeostatic sleep drive. The longer you remain awake, the more adenosine accumulates, and the stronger the pressure to sleep becomes. This process operates independently of your circadian clock, forming one half of the two-process model of sleep regulation. Understanding adenosine's role explains not only why you feel tired after prolonged wakefulness, but also how caffeine works, why naps reduce sleepiness, and what happens during sleep deprivation. At its core, adenosine is a byproduct of cellular energy metabolism. When cells break down adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, to release energy for cellular processes, they produce adenosine diphosphate, or ADP, adenosine monophosphate, or AMP, and eventually free adenosine. During wakefulness, when neural activity and energy consumption are high, adenosine levels rise progressively in the extracellular space of the brain, particularly in the basal forebrain, a region critical for arousal. Adenosine binds to adenosine receptors, particularly A1 and A2 subtypes, on wake-promoting neurons, inhibiting their activity. This reduces neural firing in arousal centers including the cholinergic neurons of the basal forebrain and the histaminergic neurons of the tuberomammillary nucleus, creating the sensation of sleepiness and cognitive fatigue. During sleep, adenosine is cleared through enzymatic breakdown and glymphatic clearance, resetting the system for the next waking period. Sleep deprivation prevents this clearance, allowing adenosine to accumulate to supernormal levels. Research published in the Journal of Neuroscience by Dr. Robert McCarley at Harvard Medical School demonstrated that adenosine levels in the basal forebrain double during 6 hours of wakefulness and continue rising with extended waking. A study published in Sleep using microdialysis in rats showed that adenosine concentrations decline during non-REM sleep, correlating with sleep depth. Thomas Roth at the Henry Ford Sleep Disorders Center has documented that adenosine accumulation explains the increased sleep propensity observed after sleep restriction, creating rebound deep sleep when opportunity for rest finally occurs. Caffeine, the world's most consumed psychoactive substance, works by blocking adenosine receptors, specifically A1 and A2A, preventing adenosine from exerting its sleep-promoting effects. This does not reduce adenosine levels, it masks the signal, which is why caffeine's effects wear off and sleepiness returns, often with increased intensity as accumulated adenosine floods receptors once caffeine clears. The practical application involves understanding that sleep pressure builds predictably, requiring approximately 14 to 16 hours of wakefulness to generate adequate drive for consolidated nighttime sleep. This explains why long naps, particularly those exceeding 90 minutes, can reduce nighttime sleep pressure, making it harder to fall asleep at bedtime. Caffeine consumption in the afternoon or evening blocks adenosine signaling at the time when levels should be rising to promote evening sleepiness. The half-life of caffeine is approximately 5 to 6 hours, meaning caffeine consumed at 4 p.m. is still 50% active at 10 p.m., compromising sleep initiation. Timing caffeine intake to morning hours allows clearance before evening adenosine accumulation reaches sleep, promoting thresholds. Think of adenosine as sand filling an hourglass. Each hour awake adds more sand. And when the bottom chamber fills sufficiently, sleep occurs. Caffeine temporarily stops you from seeing how full the chamber is, but the sand keeps accumulating. Managing adenosine accumulation is a practical way to optimize sleep pressure, ensuring adequate homeostatic drive for sleep by timing caffeine strategically and understanding how waking duration and naps influence nighttime sleep quality. Why you wake at 3 a.m. One of the most common and distressing sleep complaints is the experience of waking in the middle of the night, typically between 2 and 4 a.m., and struggling to return to sleep. This phenomenon, often called sleep maintenance insomnia, differs from difficulty initiating sleep and can occur even in individuals who fall asleep easily, while occasional nocturnal awakenings are normal, occurring 4 to 6 times per night during stage transitions. Prolonged wakefulness during these periods signals underlying dysfunction. The causes are multiple and include cortisol dysregulation, blood sugar fluctuations, sleep apnea, and anxiety, but understanding the specific mechanisms allows targeted intervention rather than general sleep hygiene platitudes. At its core, the 3 a.m. awakening often reflects the intersection of cortisol rhythm and glucose regulation. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, follows a circadian pattern, reaching its nadir, or lowest point, between midnight and 3 a.m., then beginning to rise in the early morning hours, peaking within 30 to 45 minutes of waking. When cortisol drops too low overnight, often due to chronic stress and hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis dysregulation, the body may release counter-regulatory hormones, including adrenaline and noradrenaline, to prevent hypoglycemia. This sympathetic activation triggers wakefulness, often accompanied by anxiety, racing thoughts, or a sensation of alertness. Blood glucose instability, particularly in individuals with insulin resistance or those who consume high-carbohydrate dinners, exacerbates this pattern. A spike in insulin following an evening meal can cause reactive hypoglycemia hours later, triggering cortisol and adrenaline release. Sleep apnea, characterized by repeated breathing cessations, causes oxygen desaturation and arousal, most commonly during REM sleep, which predominates in the second half of the night. Research published in Psychoneuroendocrinology demonstrated that individuals with chronic insomnia show flattened cortisol rhythms, with higher evening levels and blunted morning rise, suggesting HPA axis dysfunction. A study in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that nocturnal hypoglycemia, even without diabetes, triggers awakening through sympathetic activation. Dr. Chris Winter, a neurologist and sleep specialist, notes that sleep architecture naturally lightens in the early morning hours as REM sleep increases, making individuals more vulnerable to awakening from minor disturbances. Research from the University of Arizona published in Sleep Medicine identified anxiety and rumination as maintaining factors. Even when physiological triggers initiate the awakening, cognitive arousal prevents return to sleep. The practical interventions target the specific underlying cause. For cortisol-related awakenings, consuming a small amount of protein and fat before bed, such as a tablespoon of almond butter or a handful of nuts, provides sustained fuel that prevents nocturnal hypoglycemia. Adaptogenic herbs including ashwagandha, particularly the KSM 66 extract at 300 to 600 milligrams, have been shown to modulate cortisol patterns. Magnesium glycinate at 200 to 400 milligrams before bed supports GABA, receptor function and may improve sleep continuity for individuals with suspected sleep apnea, characterized by snoring, witnessed breathing pauses, or morning headaches. Polysomnography or home sleep testing is essential. If awakening occurs, avoid checking time, as this creates performance anxiety. Practice cognitive diffusion techniques, observing thoughts without engagement, and consider stimulus control, leaving bed if awake longer than 20 minutes. Think of 3 a.m. wakefulness as an alarm system, signaling that something in your metabolic or stress response system requires recalibration. Addressing middle of the night awakenings is a practical way to improve sleep continuity, identifying and treating underlying metabolic, hormonal, or respiratory dysfunction that fragments sleep architecture. Naps. The right way and wrong way. Napping occupies a paradoxical position in sleep science, celebrated in some cultures and contexts as restorative and health-promoting, while condemned in others as a sign of laziness or a disruptor of nighttime sleep. The truth is more nuanced. The effects of napping depend entirely on duration, timing, and individual sleep need. A strategically timed short nap can enhance alertness, cognitive performance, and mood, while a poorly timed or excessively long nap can induce sleep inertia, the groggy disorientation upon waking, and reduce homeostatic sleep pressure, making nighttime sleep initiation difficult. Understanding the sleep stages entered during naps of different lengths allows precise application of napping as a tool rather than a random indulgence. At its core, nap physiology is determined by the depth of sleep achieved, which correlates directly with duration. A nap of 10 to 20 minutes, often called a power nap, typically includes only stage N1 and light stage N2 sleep. This brief period reduces adenosine levels slightly without entering slow wave sleep, allowing relatively easy awakening without sleep inertia. Studies show that alertness and performance improve within minutes and last 2 to 3 hours. A 30-minute nap risks entering deeper N2 or even N3 sleep, creating moderate sleep inertia upon waking. Though benefits increase once inertia clears, a 90-minute nap allows completion of a full sleep cycle, including REM sleep, and ends naturally at a lighter stage, minimizing inertia while providing more substantial cognitive restoration. The timing of naps interacts with circadian rhythm. Most individuals experience a post-lunch dip in alertness, occurring between 1 and 3 p.m., regardless of meal consumption. This circadian trove represents an optimal nap window. Napping after 4 p.m. reduces evening sleep pressure and delays sleep onset at night. Research published in Nature Neuroscience by Dr. Sarah Mednick at UC San Diego demonstrated that a 90-minute nap containing REM, sleep-enhanced creative problem, solving by 40% compared to quiet rest. A study published in Sleep examined the dose-response relationship of nap duration, finding that 10-minute naps produced immediate improvements in alertness and performance lasting up to 3 hours, while 30-minute naps required a recovery period of 15 to 30 minutes due to sleep inertia before benefits emerged. The Harvard Nurses' Health Study, analyzing data from over 23,000 participants, found that individuals who napped 3 times weekly for less than 30 minutes had a 37% lower risk of coronary mortality, while longer or more frequent naps showed no benefit. Dr. Matthew Walker notes that naps cannot fully replace lost nighttime sleep, as they rarely include sufficient slow wave sleep for complete physical restoration. The practical application requires matching nap type to goal and context. For a quick alertness boost without grogginess, set a timer for 20 minutes, allowing 10 minutes to fall asleep and 10 to 15 minutes of light sleep, consuming caffeine immediately before a 20-minute nap, called a coffee nap, allows the stimulant to take effect as you wake, enhancing alertness synergistically. For more substantial restoration when time permits, allow 90 minutes to complete a full cycle. Schedule naps between 1 and 3 p.m. to align with the circadian dip. Individuals with insomnia or difficulty falling asleep at night should avoid naps entirely, as even brief naps reduce homeostatic sleep pressure. Think of naps as strategic power downs. A brief restart clears temporary system lag, while a full cycle allows deeper maintenance. But mistimed or excessive napping disrupts the primary overnight restoration period. Strategic napping is a practical way to enhance daytime alertness and cognitive function, using specific duration and timing to capture benefits while avoiding sleep inertia and preservation of nighttime sleep quality. The gut-brain highway. Your second brain, microbiome. The human body contains approximately 37 trillion human cells, yet harbors nearly 40 trillion bacterial cells, creating a biological reality that challenges the notion of individual identity. Your microbiome. The vast community of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other microorganisms residing primarily in your gastrointestinal tract outnumbers your own cells and contains 100 times more genes than your human genome. What was once dismissed as passive bacterial colonization is now recognized as a metabolically active organ system that influences digestion, immune function, neurotransmitter production, and even behavior and cognition. The paradox of modern medicine is that decades of antibiotic use, ultra-processed foods, and sanitation practices have systematically depleted microbial diversity, creating a biological mismatch between human physiology and the microbial partners it evolved to depend upon. At its core, the gut microbiome functions as a metabolic factory and communication network, transforming dietary components that human enzymes cannot process into bioactive compounds that influence systemic physiology. The colon, home to the densest microbial populations, contains approximately 100 trillion organisms representing over 1,000 different species. These microbes ferment dietary fiber into short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAS, particularly butyrate, propionate, and acetate, which serve as primary fuel for colonocytes, the cells lining the colon, and regulate immune function and inflammation. The microbiome synthesizes essential vitamins including vitamin K2, several B vitamins, and supports the production of neurotransmitter precursors. Approximately 90% of the body's serotonin is produced in the gut, though primarily by enterochromaffin cells, influenced by microbial metabolites. The composition of your microbiome is determined by birth method, early life antibiotic exposure, diet, stress, sleep, and environmental factors. Dysbiosis, the state of microbial imbalance, is characterized by reduced diversity, loss of beneficial species like Akkermansia mucinifil and Faecalibacterium prosnitzi, and overgrowth of potentially pathogenic species. Research published in Science by Dr. Jeffrey Gordon at Washington University demonstrated that transferring gut microbiota from obese mice into germ-free mice induced obesity, while transfer from lean mice maintained leanness, despite identical diets, proving that microbiome composition causally influences metabolism. The Human Microbiome Project, a National Institutes of Health initiative, cataloged microbial communities across body sites in healthy individuals, revealing that microbiome diversity correlates with metabolic health. A landmark study published in Cell examined over 1,000 individuals, finding that microbiome composition predicted post-meal glucose responses more accurately than carbohydrate counting alone. Dr. Emran Mayer at UCLA has published extensively on the gut-brain axis, documenting bidirectional communication through the vagus nerve, immune signaling, and microbial metabolites that cross the blood-brain barrier. Research from University College Cork demonstrated that germ-free mice, raised without any microbiome, exhibit abnormal stress responses, anxiety-like behavior, and altered brain chemistry, deficits partially reversed by microbial colonization early in life. The practical approach to supporting microbiome health centers on diversity of dietary inputs. Studies show that consuming 30 or more different plant foods weekly, including vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, seeds, and whole grains, significantly increases microbial diversity compared to restricted dietary patterns. Fermented foods introduce live microorganisms, while fiber provides fuel for resident bacteria. Avoiding unnecessary antibiotics preserves microbial communities, though when antibiotics are medically necessary, probiotic supplementation during and after treatment may reduce dysbiosis. Polyphenol-rich foods, including berries, green tea, and dark chocolate, support beneficial bacterial strains. Chronic stress, poor sleep, and artificial sweeteners, particularly saccharin and sucralose, have been shown to negatively alter microbiome composition. Think of your microbiome as an internal garden. Diversity creates resilience, monoculture creates vulnerability, and the quality of inputs determines the ecosystem's function. Cultivating microbiome diversity and health is a practical way to influence metabolism, immune function, and neurological signaling, leveraging the trillions of microbial partners that constitute a fundamental component of human physiology. Psychobiotics are real. The idea that consuming specific bacteria could alter mood, anxiety, Or cognitive function sounds like pseudoscience, yet rigorous research has identified particular probiotic strains that demonstrably influence brain chemistry and behavior through gut-brain signaling. These organisms, termed psychobiotics, represent a subset of probiotics with measurable effects on mental health outcomes. The mechanism is not metaphorical or indirect. Specific bacterial strains produce neurotransmitters, modulate the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal stress axis, reduce inflammatory cytokines that affect brain function, and communicate directly with the central nervous system through vagal pathways. What makes psychobiotics particularly significant is not merely their existence, but the growing evidence from randomized controlled trials in humans, moving the field beyond animal models into clinical application for depression, anxiety, and stress resilience. At its core, psychobiotic action operates through multiple interconnected pathways linking gut microbiota to brain function. Certain bacterial strains produce gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, including Lactobacillus rhamnosus and Bifidobacterium dentium. Others produce precursors to serotonin and dopamine. Though these large molecules cannot cross the blood-brain barrier directly, they influence peripheral nervous system signaling that affects central mood regulation. Psychobiotics modulate the HPA axis, the neuroendocrine system controlling stress response, by reducing circulating cortisol levels and inflammatory cytokines including interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, which are elevated in depression and anxiety. The vagus nerve, a major bidirectional communication channel between gut and brain, transmits signals from gut microbiota to brainstem nuclei, influencing regions including the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Studies using vagotomy, surgical cutting of the vagus nerve, in mice demonstrate that some psychobiotic effects disappear when this pathway is severed, confirming its mechanistic importance. A groundbreaking study published in Gastroenterology by Dr. Kirsten Tillich at UCLA used functional MRI to demonstrate that women consuming a fermented milk product containing Bifidobacterium animalis, Streptococcus thermophilus, Lactobacillus bulgaricus, and Lactococcus lactis for 4 weeks showed reduced activity in brain regions processing emotion and sensation compared to controls. Research published in Brain, Behavior, and Immunity examined Lactobacillus rhamnosus JB1 in mice, showing reduced anxiety and depression like behavior, altered GABA receptor expression in the brain, and lower corticosterone, effects eliminated by vagotomy. A human trial published in Psychopharmacology tested Lactobacillus aureus 52 and Bifidobacterium longum auro 175 in healthy volunteers, demonstrating reduced psychological distress, anxiety, and urinary cortisol after 30 days. John Cryan at University College Cork, who coined the term psychobiotic, published research in Molecular Psychiatry showing that Bifidobacterium longum 1714 reduced stress and improved memory in healthy volunteers. Meta-analyses published in the Journal of Neurogastroenterology and Motility indicate modest, but significant effects on depression and anxiety symptoms. The practical application requires selecting specific strains with clinical evidence, rather than assuming all probiotics provide psychobiotic effects. Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Bifidobacterium longum, and Lactobacillus helveticus have the strongest human data for anxiety and mood. Typical doses range from 1 billion to 10 billion colony-forming units, or CFUS, daily, taken consistently for at least 4 weeks before assessing effects. Psychobiotics are not psychiatric medications and show smaller effect sizes than pharmaceutical interventions, but offer a complementary approach with minimal side effects. They appear most effective for subclinical anxiety and stress rather than major depressive disorder. Refrigerated formulations generally maintain viability better than shelf-stable products. Though some strains are stable at room temperature, think of psychobiotics as tuning instruments in an orchestra. They don't replace the musicians, but proper tuning allows the ensemble to function more harmoniously. Psychobiotic supplementation is a practical way to modulate gut-brain signaling, leveraging specific bacterial strains with demonstrated effects on stress response, mood regulation, and cognitive function through microbiome-mediated pathways. Fermented foods are ancient medicine. Every traditional culture developed methods of food fermentation, not as culinary experimentation but as survival necessity, allowing preservation before refrigeration, enhancing nutrient bioavailability, and inadvertently creating some of the most microbiome-supportive foods in the human diet. Fermented foods including yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, tempeh, and kombucha contain live microorganisms that survived and multiplied during fermentation, transforming raw ingredients through bacterial or fungal metabolism. Modern research has validated what ancestral practice discovered empirically. Regular consumption of fermented foods increases microbiome diversity, reduces inflammatory markers, and may provide health benefits exceeding those of isolated probiotic supplements. The distinction between fermented foods and probiotics is significant. Fermented foods deliver live organisms within a complex matrix of bioactive compounds, metabolites, and structural components that supplements cannot replicate. At its core, fermentation is a metabolic process where microorganisms, primarily bacteria or yeast, convert sugars and starches into acids, gases, or alcohol under anaerobic conditions. Lactic acid fermentation, performed by lactobacillus and other lactic acid bacteria, produces the tangy flavor characteristic of yogurt, sauerkraut, and kimchi. The acidic environment created during fermentation inhibits pathogenic bacteria, preserving food while allowing beneficial strains to thrive. These organisms, numbering 100 million to 1 billion CFUs per gram in traditional preparations, include strains rarely found in commercial supplements. During fermentation, bacteria predigest proteins into amino acids, break down antinutrients like phytic acid that inhibit mineral absorption, synthesize B vitamins, and produce bioactive peptides with potential anti-inflammatory and antihypertensive properties. The fermentation process creates unique metabolites including conjugated linoleic acid in fermented dairy, gamma-aminobutyric acid in kimchi, and various organic acids that influence gut pH and microbial ecology. A landmark study published in Cell by researchers at Stanford University compared the effects of high fermented food diets versus high fiber diets over 10 weeks. The fermented food group, consuming an average of 6 servings daily, showed significant increases in microbiome diversity and decreases in 19 inflammatory markers, including interleukin-6, while the high-fiber group showed no change in diversity, though individual responses varied. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition demonstrated that kefir consumption improved lactose digestion in lactose-intolerant individuals, attributed to bacterial beta-galactosidase enzyme activity. A study in nutrition research found that kimchi consumption for 4 weeks reduced body fat, fasting glucose, and total cholesterol in overweight adults. Dr. Robert Hutkins at the University of Nebraska has documented that many commercially available fermented foods, particularly shelf-stable versions, are pasteurized post-fermentation, killing live organisms and eliminating probiotic benefits. Only products labeled as containing live active cultures, stored refrigerated, deliver viable microorganisms. The practical approach involves incorporating diverse fermented foods into daily eating. A serving of unsweetened yogurt or kefir, 2 to 4 ounces of sauerkraut or kimchi, or 8 ounces of kombucha provides meaningful microbial exposure. Homemade fermentation using simple salt brines for vegetables or starter cultures for dairy allows control over sugar content and ensures live cultures. Start with small amounts, 1 to 2 tablespoons of fermented vegetables, as rapid introduction can cause temporary digestive discomfort in individuals unaccustomed to high microbial loads. Variety matters. Different fermented foods contain distinct microbial communities. Think of fermented foods as immigrants establishing residence. Not all will colonize permanently, but their passage influences the resident community and contributes beneficial metabolites during transit. Regular consumption of fermented foods is a practical way to increase microbial exposure and diversity, delivering live organisms and bioactive metabolites that support gut health through mechanisms distinct from and complementary to isolated probiotic supplements. Prebiotics feed your probiotics. The probiotic supplement industry has grown into a multi-billion-dollar market. Yet consuming billions of bacteria means little if those organisms lack the fuel to survive and function in your gut. Prebiotics are non-digestible food components, primarily types of fiber, that resist breakdown by human digestive enzymes but serve as fuel for beneficial gut bacteria. This creates a critical distinction. Probiotics are the organisms themselves. Prebiotics are the food that allows those organisms to thrive. The most effective approach to microbiome health is not choosing between prebiotics and probiotics, but understanding how they work synergistically, with prebiotics often showing equal or greater impact on microbiome composition and metabolic health compared to probiotic supplementation alone. At its core, Prebiotics are specific types of fermentable fiber that selectively stimulate the growth and activity of beneficial bacterial genera, particularly Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus. The most studied prebiotics include inulin, a fructan found in chicory root, Jerusalem artichoke and onions, fructooligosaccharides, or FOS, present in bananas, garlic, and asparagosaccharides, or GOS, found in legumes and available as supplements, and resistant starch, which resists digestion in the small intestine and reaches the colon intact. When beneficial bacteria ferment these substrates, they produce short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, which serves multiple functions, fueling colonocytes, reducing intestinal permeability often called leaky gut, modulating immune function, and influencing systemic metabolism. Butyrate production correlates with improved insulin sensitivity, reduced inflammation, and enhanced satiety signaling. The selectivity of prebiotics is key. They preferentially feed beneficial species while providing less support for potentially pathogenic bacteria. Research published in Gastroenterology demonstrated that inulin supplementation at 16 grams daily for 2 weeks significantly increased Bifidobacterium abundance and butyrate production in healthy adults. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition compared the effects of prebiotics versus probiotics on calcium absorption, finding that GOS supplementation increased absorption more effectively than Bifidobacterium supplementation alone. Meta-analysis published in the British Journal of Nutrition examining 26 trials found that prebiotic supplementation significantly reduced fasting glucose, insulin, and hemoglobin A1c in individuals with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. Dr. Hannah Holscher at the University of Illinois has documented that resistant starch, found in cooked and cooled potatoes, rice, and green bananas, increases butyrate production and improves insulin sensitivity. Research shows that prebiotic effects are dose-dependent, with benefits typically appearing at 5 to 20 grams daily, far exceeding the 2 to 3 grams the average Western diet provides. The practical approach focuses on food sources before supplements. Foods rich in prebiotic fiber include garlic, onions, leeks, asparagus, underripe bananas, oats, apples, and legumes. Resistant starch can be increased by cooking and cooling starchy foods like potatoes, rice, and pasta, a process that restructures starch molecules into resistant forms. Prebiotic supplements, including inulin powder or partially hydrolyzed GAR gum, allow targeted doses. Start with small amounts, 2 to 5 grams, as rapid introduction causes gas and bloating in individuals with low baseline fiber intake. Increase gradually over 2 to 4 weeks as gut bacteria adapt. Think of prebiotics as fertilizer. Introducing new plants, probiotics, helps, but without proper soil nutrients, they cannot establish robust populations. Prioritizing prebiotic fiber intake is a practical way to support existing beneficial bacteria and enhance the effectiveness of probiotic interventions, creating the metabolic conditions for a diverse and functional microbiome. The vagus nerve, your gut's hotline. The gut and brain are separated by significant anatomical distance, yet communicate with a speed and specificity that rivals modern telecommunications. The vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve and the longest nerve in the autonomic nervous system, serves as the primary physical communication highway between the gastrointestinal tract and the brain. This bidirectional pathway transmits signals in both directions, carrying information about gut status to the brain and conveying brain signals that modulate digestion, inflammation, and gut motility. What makes the vagus nerve particularly significant in modern health research is its role in the gut-brain axis, mediating the influence of gut microbiota on mood, cognition, and stress response, and its potential as a therapeutic target for conditions ranging from depression to inflammatory bowel disease. At its core, the vagus nerve is a mixed nerve containing approximately 80% afferent, sensory, fibers that carry information from organs to the brain, and 20% efferent, motor, fibers that transmit commands from brain to organs. The vagal afferents have receptors in the gut lining that detect mechanical stretch, chemical signals including hormones and neurotransmitters, and inflammatory mediators. These signals travel to the nucleus tractus solitarius in the brainstem, which projects to regions including the hypothalamus, amygdala, and prefrontal cortex, areas involved in emotion, stress response, and executive function. The efferent vagal fibers, part of the parasympathetic nervous system, release acetylcholine, which slows heart rate, stimulates digestive enzyme secretion, promotes gut motility, and modulates immune function through the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway. Vagal tone, the baseline level of vagal activity, can be measured through heart rate variability, or HRV, with higher HRV, indicating stronger vagal influence and better physiological resilience. Research published in Biological Psychiatry demonstrated that subdiaphragmatic vagotomy, cutting the vagus nerve below the diaphragm in mice, prevented the antidepressant and anxiolytic effects of Lactobacillus rhamnosus, proving that vagal signaling is necessary for certain psychobiotic effects. A study in Nature Communications showed that vagus nerve stimulation, or VS, an FDA-approved treatment for epilepsy and depression involving electrical stimulation of the nerve, reduced inflammation in rheumatoid arthritis patients by modulating cytokine production. Kevin Tracy at the Feinstein Institute discovered the inflammatory reflex, a vagally mediated pathway where the brain detects inflammation through afferent signals and responds with efferent anti-inflammatory commands. Research from Emory University published in Gut found that vagal tone, measured by HRV, correlates with microbiome diversity, suggesting bidirectional influence. Studies show that chronic stress, which suppresses vagal activity, alters gut microbiome composition, while interventions that increase vagal tone, including meditation and slow breathing, influence microbial communities. The practical application involves techniques that enhance vagal tone, slow diaphragmatic breathing, particularly at a rate of 5 to 6 breaths per minute, activates the vagus nerve and increases HRV, cold exposure, including cold showers or face immersion in cold water, triggers the vagal dive reflex. Humming, singing, or gargling activates vagal motor fibers that innervate throat muscles. Meditation practices, particularly loving kindness meditation, have been shown to increase vagal tone over 8 weeks. Regular moderate exercise enhances vagal activity, while overtraining suppresses it. HRV can be tracked using smartphone apps and chest strap monitors, providing feedback on autonomic balance. Think of the vagus nerve as a fiber optic cable, carrying vast amounts of information in both directions. The bandwidth determines how effectively gut and brain coordinate function. Enhancing vagal tone through lifestyle interventions is a practical way to optimize gut-brain communication, supporting stress resilience, immune regulation, and the mechanisms through which microbiome composition influences mental and physical health. You now understand 5 foundational systems: exercise intensity that builds mitochondrial capacity, molecules that clear senescent cells and activate autophagy, metabolic flexibility that determines energy stability, sleep architecture that restores both body and brain, and the microbial ecosystem that produces neurotransmitters and communicates directly with your nervous system. But here is what we have not discussed: the hidden fuel gauge that determines whether you age rapidly or slowly. Most people check it never, doctors measure it incorrectly, and the damage happens silently, invisibly, for decades, until it does not. We have not covered the breathing pattern you are using right now, the one that is, quite literally, reshaping the structure of your face, narrowing your airway, and setting you up for sleep apnea and chronic disease. There is a type of oil, consumed by millions daily, that did not exist 100 years ago. The debate is not whether it is healthy. The debate is whether it is the primary driver of modern chronic disease. And then there is the practice, used by the healthiest populations on Earth, that requires no equipment, costs nothing, and produces mortality reductions that rival pharmaceutical interventions. Finnish populations have known this for centuries. The data is now undeniable. Your cells respond to stress in a specific pattern, a biological principle called hormesis. Cold, heat, fasting, and exercise all follow this same law. Get the dose wrong and you accelerate aging. Get it right and you activate cellular defense systems that were lying dormant. Finally, there is the spectrum you cannot escape, present every moment of every day, that controls your master clock, determines your sleep quality, regulates your metabolism, and when mistimed by even 2 hours, increases your disease risk by double digits. Most people get this backwards, exposing themselves to the wrong wavelengths, at the wrong times, every single day. Before you implement anything discussed here, remember, this is educational content based on peer-reviewed research, not medical advice. Consult qualified healthcare professionals before starting any supplement, medication, or significant intervention. Your biology is individual. Professional guidance is essential. Now, if these 5 systems changed how you think about health, leave a comment. Which mechanism surprised you most? And if this information added value, a like tells the algorithm to share this with others who need it. Because what comes next, in part 2, is not supplementary. It is essential. Glucose variability, breathing mechanics, dietary fats, temperature stress, light exposure. These are not minor variables. These are the mechanisms that determine whether your biology supports longevity or undermines it. Part 2 reveals what you are missing.